Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Zero to Productive, a Better Employee Onboarding Experience. According to BambooHR, effective employee onboarding programs increase performance by up to 11%. And what makes an effective employee onboarding program? Reducing the time it takes for new employees to get the tools they need to do their best work. Today, we are so excited to have Matthew Phillips, a professional services engineer from Jamf, to walk through tips and tricks to providing a more streamlined and intuitive onboarding experience for users. My name is Jen Kaplan, and I'm the Global Marketing Manager here today to do a quick overview of who Jamf is. For those who aren't familiar with Jamf, we are the gold standard for Apple device management. We embrace the native Apple technology experience consumers have come to know and love. And we've been exclusively focused on Apple device management for more than 15 years, supporting the deployments of some of the world's most valuable brands, technology companies, and schools. Because we are exclusively focused on Apple, we have offered zero-day support for all Apple releases for over a decade, supporting new operating systems and features from the day they're available from Apple. And now I'll pass it over to Matthew Phillips to talk through today's agenda. Take it away, Matthew.
All right. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jen, for the introduction. Let's take a look at the agenda. First up, why onboarding matters. The short answer is, it's great. We'll go into more detail, but that's all you need to know. Then we'll go over 3 of our favorite zero-touch apps in the interest of augmenting your current onboarding process. All of these offer user interaction, so we'll talk about how to leverage that, and to wrap up with some advanced models on how to make this all work. Finally, we will set aside some time for questions and answers, and if you think of something whilst I'm talking, just feel free to throw it into the QA section. And I suppose if you're really shy about it, I think there's an option to chat directly to the presenter, but hey, we're all friends here, and we're all here for the same reason. So with that ambitious goal, let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about onboarding. In the context of this presentation, I use the term onboarding in generic sense that could apply to both employees of a company or students at a school. It's easy to assume that onboarding is a very involved process, signing lots of papers, resetting password, account creation, a couple of trips to help desk, yada, yada, yada. And that is if the IT help desk staff member is not sitting right next to the new hire, walking them through every step of the way. It doesn't have to be this way. With Jamf and other software integrations together, Mac admins have the tools that they can leverage to make new Mac setup in their environment simple, painless, and even fun. When onboarding is modeled around provisioning, it's not limited to new hires or new enrollments only. You can take what we learned from this webinar and apply it to a compliance workflow for the Macs that are already out in the wild. Now, obviously, you don't want to give your veteran employees the same experience that the day one interns get, but the concepts and workflows here are still relevant for both use cases. Think of it as that easy button in self-service. Want to make sure that the Macs have been, quote, blessed by IT, then give your end user a big friendly button, let them click it, and Jamf can do the rest. Most of our customers today are giving the end users the option to choose the platform. And with this user choice, we're seeing a huge uptake in Mac adoption. More Macs in your environment mean more visibility from above, and usually more work for the admin. That admin is probably you. And it's important that we have a smooth and repeatable provisioning process, even more so if you're expecting growth. It isn't the end of the world when you have to make 1 or 2 new Macs a month. But if you have to set up 75 new Macs every week or 500 Macs during a summer break, you'll start to hope that there's a better way to do it. And usually, tasks like imaging or provisioning get easier when you throw more bodies at them, which is rarely cost-effective. So if you could have the end user do the work for you, now the work is being distributed across the entire organization. Not only does that lighten the load of the IT staff, but it empowers your users to set up the device themselves through zero touch, giving them the confidence and abilities to become a self-servicing user. It If the user knows where to find things like maintenance tools, installers, they can help themselves, and you'll probably see a decrease in help desk tickets. Now, you've got time to work on more important, bigger picture parts of Mac management, like rolling out that High Sierra upgrade. So, when letting the end user set up their own Mac, the process needs to be straightforward and enjoyable. You don't want to give them a bad experience right out of the gate. That's bad for everybody. And hey, you know what? This is not just for the end user. Zero Touch is great for the IT staff configuring the device. If you've got that super complicated setup that requires a magic bind process and some crazy crypto files that go somewhere strange, then the help desk staff could be at the helm of this Zero Touch provisioning process. We make it foolproof for help desk users as well as end users. Less steps means more happy people. And then once that Mac is 90% finished, we can hand it off to the end user for that last step, logging in. It's all in the interest in hitting the ground running, getting the minimum amount of configuration and software needed on the machine for compliance and productivity. And they get the rest later. In an ideal world, a provisioning process could be run on any Mac already deployed in your fleet with no ill effect, because they've all been set up the same and they've all been set up correctly, right? So what's the harm? We'll talk about successful onboarding. I'm just going to say it. Imaging is dead. You've heard it. We've all heard it. And it's true. If you haven't already, you've got a great reason to change how you're doing it. Get your users to set up their own Mac. It doesn't have to be hard, and it doesn't have to take long. We can make it bulletproof through scripting and very clever scoping. Get the end user working on a new computer as soon as possible, and it is possible if we keep it simple. So let's see how it's done. We start with Jamf. We add in some DEP, a little provisioning script, and then bolt on a user feedback app. These apps, for the most part, don't do any work. They're just a front end to look at. There are a few exceptions, and we'll get into those, but even those exceptions are still relying on Jamf to do the heavy lifting. They allow us as admins to control the experience and gather data from the user. But their biggest function is to just distract the user while we set up their Mac in the background. I've seen some implementations where they put the new hire handbook in front of the user, which is cool. And I've also seen a screenshot where they're allowed to play a game of Pac-Man while the machine is set up. And that's really cool. So whatever you show your user, you've got a captive audience for the time, so get some information out of them. I think the best thing about a zero-touch DEP experience is letting the user do the work for you. And speaking of doing the work for you, the Jamf Marketplace. Jamf has assembled a fantastic repository of software integrations. These community titles are meant to supplement Jamf Pro, and you can check them out over at marketplace.jamf.com. In fact, we have published a webinar that goes into more detail on this, and you can go watch that. We're going to look at 3 software titles available on Marketplace today. They are in no particular order: SplashBuddy, Adept, and DEPNotify. They're all 3 open source and can be customized to your needs. It's worth saying that I don't promote any one title over the other, despite what you may have heard. They all have key strengths and they all have key differences. So we got to find the one that's right for you. Let's take a look at those features. Okay, so I lied. The first one isn't on Marketplace, and you can't download it because you already have it. It's built in, and I'm talking about using Jamf Helper and self-service. Jamf Pro is a killer toolkit with plenty of features right out of the box. And if you are so inclined to leverage only the built-in tools you have, a zero-touch experience is possible using Jamf Helper. It may not be the most razzle-dazzle setup in the world, but you have a ton of flexibility and there's not much of a learning curve. We want to keep it simple, and you can still leverage a configuration script that calls policies. That same script can also audit the results of the provisioning process, so you can have like a build report. The biggest problem here is when giving the users full access to Finder, you can't exactly force them to click the button. Some solutions I've seen out there are install a launch agent at enrollment, or you could start nagging them with pop-ups until they set up their Mac. Sometimes the simplest approach is to just scope self-service to only show one and only one button until they click it. After they get their Mac configured, they fall out of a smart group and are able to see the rest of the items in self-service. It's a pretty solid option. Now on to the part that you probably want to see, the Jamf integrations. First up is Splash Buddy. Here we see a simple message in the presentation window on the left with a few icons in the sidebar on the right. Splash Buddy runs in a containerized in the user space, so it doesn't require elevated access. Once it's launched, it reads the Jamf log for keywords that allows it to change the jellies and the position of the buttons. We can customize the end action of the button to reboot, log out, or simply quit. The compiled versions of Splash Buddy are provided by Amaris. They're a great group. Currently, Christoph Fellner is in charge of release and commits. Of course, this is an open source software available on GitHub for customization. So if it doesn't do what you want it to do and you know your way around Xcode, have at it. If you don't know Xcode, there's still a solid community of people out there on the Mac Admin Slack channel. And it doesn't hurt to ask. A lot of features that have been added into Splash Buddy have been done so because the users have requested features. Building the package installer for deployment of Splash Buddy is simple with a built-in build sh script. And Splash Buddy can ensure that the Mac is fully ready with the required software before we allow the user out and get them in Finder. It provides a clear status on the software that's being installed through the use of icons and color-changing jellies. You can display important information in the main window by customizing the presentation bundle, which supports localization, so that's a plus for international. And you have an option to completely hide the sidebar and show only the HTML content with no applications or jellies. It also supports user feedback, and that's done so by writing a file from the answers that the user gives. Jamf Pro then picks up that data in the inventory through the use of extension attributes. And all of these titles will be available if you follow our links. This one is going to be at http://jamf.it/splashbuddy. Next up is Adept. Here we see the user inputting custom fields that would be submitted to Jamf. And now Adept requires admin password because it is leveraging the Jamf API to submit that data as inventory. Then it calls a policy that contains a script. That script will install the software, set the settings, and change the status from those spinners to checkboxes. It wraps up by showing optional next steps webpage portal to the user, which is pretty cool. Adept, I think, is a killer name. You get it, right? Like, you can't spell Adept without DEP. I love it. And it used to be called, if you're familiar, DEP enrollment.app, and it had a very generic pink DEP icon, which I think we use in Jamf as well. It's a change for the better. Adept is modeled very closely after Apple's own Setup Assistant app, which is nice because it's a smooth transition from the DEP pages into this app. I suppose it's designed that way on purpose. As I said, it does leverage the Jamf API, so it does require admin access. That's a really cool feature, but it might not be allowed in some environments for security reasons. So you are able to decide when to change the status of the icons, but everything that gets dumped into the Jamf log is displayed to the user above the continue button. And that one's available at jamfit/ADEPT. Last one I'm going to show you is called DEPNotify. It is built by the same cool cat that brought you Nomad, and I didn't include it in my JNUT presentation back in October because it wasn't full screen. But it's definitely worth mentioning here because it has a ton of awesome features. Not being full screen has multiple benefits. First, you can easily throw dialog boxes up at the user, and they are allowed to interact with other apps like VPN setup or backup software, and they can poke around and use the computer while we're setting up in the background. This could be looked at as a feature or as a problem. The version of the video you're seeing today is fresh off the press, and it's showing the user interaction feature that was written by Federico Diaz, and it is completely awesome. And as I said, brand new as of this morning. So you guys are lucky to see it. DEPNotify is a clever bit of kit. It allows you to control echoing out text to DEPNotify.log. It's just stored in /tmp, so it cleans up after itself when it's done. And it's able to pick up on a ton of commands, including status changes, control behavior, pump bar progression, making the user accept a EULA, other interactive steps with pauses, dialog boxes, alerts, and customizable end actions. The list goes on. I'm sure I missed something in there. And the guide is available on Joel's site if you follow our link. Oh, and the best thing is, if somehow there is better than that list, this software can be run in an easy mode where you configure it to run for your preferred MDM provider, in this case, Jamf. So whilst it's in Jamf mode, it is reading the logs just like the other two apps, but still letting you control it via script. User interaction. This is where we can take action. We can use gathered information to select the correct provisioning process. A script can make decisions based on answers given and choose the correct policies. Things like deciding which domain to bind to or what VPN settings to use. You could even give your user the option for a quick setup, which would skip, say, Office, Adobe, or any of the heavy installers that you won't want them to do when configuring remotely. These larger installers can be available later in self-service or cache down automatically and let them run once the user's up and running. Okay, so user feedback isn't a new concept. We can throw dialog boxes at your user. We have been able to for some time. But doing it during the onboarding process, we can make it required, and we can enable Jamf to pivot down the decision tree of the provisioning process. So now that you've seen some of the zero-touch feedback apps, you're probably getting ideas of what kind of information you want to get from your users. And if you aren't, I've got a few queued up for you. Let's talk about the easy ones. Ask the user for location, building, department, asset tag, or any of the stuff you can't get from AD. I like to talk about the other personal items. You could ask them their shirt size, or even dietary needs for company parties, or heck, you could even ask them their spirit animal. It's like a choose your own adventure. I know Culture Ramp asks them what their favorite color is, and they use it. It's pretty clever, but keep it useful. Advanced zero-touch models. I'm not going to go into too much detail on exactly how to implement these workflows because I want to stress why we use these workflows. Provisioning scripts rely on simple but useful policies with good exclusion scoping, and you need a lot of them. You need mutually exclusive policies that don't overlap in function. If you have a Chrome installer in self-service, you also have a Chrome installer during provisioning, don't kill yourself on trying to make one super policy that does everything. There's no shame in having separate policies. In fact, there's probably going to be 3 policies, one to do the install, and then the other 2 for self-service and provisioning. We'll also touch on CIS compliance workflow, and I can't miss out on an opportunity to talk about Legos. It's only an analogy of building with Lego bricks, but still, here we go. The square and super simple blocks are always useful, whatever you're trying to build. While the crazy curved translucent windshield piece is great for a spaceship or a race car, it's not very useful elsewhere, and the same is true with Jamf Pro. Over-specialized policies are awesome, something to be proud of, but can't get used everywhere. It's better to keep your policies simple and then connect all the policies together to make them more complex. A coworker of mine, Bill Smith, gave a Gen Ed presentation in October called Moving Beyond Once Per Computer Workflows. It's a fantastic session, and I encourage you to check it out. He also shares my affinities for Lego analogies, and in his session he said, remember, management is constant, it's self-evaluating and ongoing. But to accomplish this, your groups, policies, scripts, etc., they all must be reusable. And it's great advice, because management is ongoing. It relies on policies that can be reused. Let's take a look at an example. Talk about Firefox. Imagine you have one master juggernaut of a policy that performs the install, drops down the PKG, installs browser settings into the user space with a DMG. It includes doc and notification to the user about the whole thing. Then it does a recon. Great. It's a killer policy. What are you going to use it for? That one thing. What if we don't want the setting? Or what if we don't want the doc? If you separate it out, it becomes more modular and then it becomes more useful. You could instead build that Firefox installer out as 5 smaller policies for each task. And then you need one of those pieces elsewhere. You can just call it by trigger name. Maybe you don't want the doc, or maybe you don't want to do a recon during provisioning. Or the self-service version of the Firefox installer shouldn't mess with the user settings. So you can separate them out. You've got a lot more options this way. Also here we can look at mutually exclusive policies. This is the idea, scope to all, where it's especially important to talk about in provisioning, because full-screen apps like Splash Buddy are designed to be run with a launch agent that starts the experience every time the user logs in. So if a provisioning script is set to run at that time, then the user will get the software installed repeatedly until it's finished. Not a bad thing, but what if it doesn't finish? What if during the onboarding, the computer might get rebooted or accidentally shut down? Maybe it runs out of battery. We want this process to resume, but we want it to resume gracefully. So all of the policies that are installing should be scoped to exclude the group that already has that title installed. If your script is built to install, let's say, Chrome, Firefox, and VLC, Jamf will go down the list, and it'll just skip the policies if the software is already there. Just imagine if you accidentally installed Microsoft Office a few times because it wasn't set to exclude. Wasted time. So, awesome provisioning scripts really shine when built with simple policies. When you build out a script, you can just call the policies that you already have. You can have a script check data on the drive. You can have it interact with the user, change the configuration steps based on that input. And if you like having a manifest, then the script could output the results of the whole provisioning process and just submit that file somewhere to a drive. Or you could have it be scraped up with an extension attribute and store it in inventory. Scripts are pretty much essential for a rock-solid onboarding experience. And the last thing I want to talk about is compliance, security compliance. Some customers may not be required to have SOC compliance or need to follow the CIS benchmark, and that's okay. But you can still leverage the tools included to ensure that all of your Macs are being configured with the correct settings and the right security limitations. CIS scripts do this work for you in a far more manageable way than dozens of individual scripts, extension attributes, and one-liners, those default rights commands, or even pushing out plist files because you know the settings are right. Take a look at this workflow, and I promise you won't regret it. The best part of it is that it works happily alongside config profiles for those settings that you do need to manage with config profiles. So, that's the presentation. Let's recap. Onboarding is great. Provisioning is the new imaging. Get your users to set their own Mac and ask them questions like asset tag or favorite color. Give them something pretty to look at. And all of this is possible with Jamf Pro, DEP, a provisioning script, and your favorite user feedback app. Oh, and you need a clever Jamf admin to bolt it all together. So I think that's why you're all here. Here are the links I discussed. People might want to do a screenshot, but don't worry, we'll have all this available for you after the recording. And at this point, I want to thank you all very much for listening to me go on, and I'll hand it over to Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. A lot of wonderful information on different onboarding processes available and tools and resources. If anyone on today's webinar has questions or would like to speak with someone at Jamf, head on over to jamf.com and click on the contact button in the nav bar at the top of the website. You can get in touch with someone at Jamf or open up the chat box and you can speak with someone directly here as well. Or if you're a Jamf customer, simply contact our customer support team. If you enjoyed today's webinar, there are plenty more webinars available on demand at jamf.com. Simply navigate to the webinars tab. You can see all of the webinars that have been recorded over the past couple of years. A lot of great topics in here. Or you can head over to Jamf Nation, have a conversation with like-minded IT admins. It's the largest Apple administrator community online, and you can troubleshoot issues, discuss situations that you may be experiencing with other like-minded professionals, and it's a great place to suggest an idea or just ask a question or have a discussion with others in your industry. Thank you for joining today's webinar, and thank you to Matthew, our host.